All right, good evening. Welcome to the program. You're listening to the Soapbox here on 90.9, 104.1 WMPG, Southern Maine's community radio station from the University of Southern Maine. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. We will be having a live conversation. If you would like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 780-4909, and you will speak to Azad, and he will put you through. My guest this evening is returning to the program. He's been here I think 2 or 3 times before. His name is Alex, and he is a law enforcement officer in the Midwest and who wishes to remain anonymous. And you can go back to the Soapbox's YouTube channel and listen to the previous episodes with him to discover why and hear us talk a little bit more about that. We might touch on that briefly tonight. But his name is Alex, and welcome to the program, Alex. Welcome back to the program, I should say.
Thanks, Eric. It's nice to be back.
All right. And so I think I neglected to mention in the introduction, and I would be remiss if I didn't, just because I think it's so interesting and might sort of surprise people, but you are a self-identified socialist who works in law enforcement. Are you not?
I am. That is true.
And we've talked more about this, but just how warmly received is that among your comrades?
You know, I actually get a lot less flack for being openly socialist than I do for being openly atheist.
Really? That's surprising.
Well, I mean, it's a thing to keep in mind, and as we discussed, I think the first time I was on the show, that the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers are members of public sector unions, and those who are intelligent enough to realize what's going on, realize that the conservative side of things might be more, law and order, and want to give more whatever military-style weapons to police and crack down on all the crooks out there and all that sort of stuff. But they also are more likely to threaten cops' livelihoods, and we care more than anything, where our bread's coming from, and so there tends to be even among officers who might like some of the tough-on-crime rhetoric of the right, they realize that the left will keep them in our good jobs with good salaries and excellent benefits.
And now, of course, you have Democratic candidate Senator Bernie Sanders saying that law enforcement agencies are essentially socialist institutions in America.
Yep. And he's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, so, Alex, I invited you on the program. Again, you wish to remain anonymous. We won't get into where you work, but I think it's safe to say you work in the Midwest. Is that fair?
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Okay.
I am, and I'll go this far. Just a quick reminder: my department would not approve my being on an interview, even if I'm not speaking as a representative of the department.
Right.
So rather than not talk to you, I'll just stay anonymous. I will say that I am very well versed with the things that have been going on in Chicago lately, and I have a lot of friends, a lot of people I know in and around the Chicago Police Department.
Good. Well, thank you for bringing that up. That is essentially why I have invited you back onto the program. You've offered some really interesting insight in the past around the Ferguson protests and other issues that have come up. And so, I mean, these police killings continue to be happening and coming to light in the media. I mean, I don't think we spoke about the Walter Scott case, but that was pretty egregious. I think you would agree. And now the Laquan McDonald case in Chicago. Can you, for our listeners, just give a brief summary of what the actual incident was that led to Laquan McDonald's shooting, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we've learned about it.
Oh, absolutely. The whole incident began when call has come in of a man behaving, or a young man, I should say, he's a teenager, he's 17, behaving erratically, and that he had a knife. Police responded to the scene. He was right outside a Burger King. He did I believe he actually jumped onto the first police SUV that showed up from the Chicago police and also slashed one of the tires on the vehicle. He then proceeded to try to move away from police. And more police arrive. We have several videos from the dash cams of the different vehicles. Significantly, there is no usable audio from any of those dash cams, and I can touch on that in a second. But one of the officers stepped out of his vehicle, an officer named Jason Van Dyke, and it is reported that the young man, Laquan McDonald, was commanded to drop the knife. He didn't drop the knife. He appears to be turning as if to move away from police, at which point he is shot. It's not entirely easy to gauge exactly the distance, but it looks like about something between 10 and 20 feet. Perspective is a little off in the videos that are available. Mm-hmm. And after Laquan McDonald is shot, looks like he's hit about 2 or 3 times, I believe. He drops to the ground. Officer Van Dyke, the only officer who was shooting, then proceeds to empty his magazine into Laquan McDonald's body on the ground. The video was very graphic. When it was released to the public, you can see his body jerking around, not from the last throes of life, but rather from the just the physical trauma being done by repeatedly getting shot. He was shot a total of 16 times. And as I said, more than a dozen of those shots hit him while he was already on the ground. Officer Van Dyke, this happened a little over a year ago, but then just a couple weeks ago, Officer Van Dyke was charged with first-degree murder. He is currently released on bond. He has been stripped of his police privileges. But as a result of it taking more than a year for the video to be released and for charges to be brought against the officer, this has led to a great deal of upsetness, to put it lightly, among the public of Chicago. And there are currently, including even today, there was a rally downtown calling for the resignation of Mayor Rahm Emanuel and of Cook County State's Attorney Anita Alvarez. And just last week, the police superintendent, Gary McCarthy, was fired by Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
All right. Well, let's jump back momentarily. You said that it's significant that there is no audio available. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's significant because we can't hear what sort of commands are being given. We can't hear what the officers are saying inside the car, the police vehicles. Also, it's significant because it's well known among law enforcement officers that even if you're forced to have dash cam videos in your car, there are ways around it. They can rig it. They can rig the cameras so that they were supposed to come on, but somehow it didn't come on. And as agencies crack down, officers who don't want to be recorded in what they're doing find ways around things. For one thing, if a lot of these things, if you put the batteries in backwards, they'll still show video, but they won't record audio. It'll actually, because it'll essentially create a sound within it which blocks out any of the microphones.
Okay, so real quick, you're listening to the Soapbox here on WMPG. My guest is Alex. He's a law enforcement officer in the Midwest, and we are talking about the Laquan McDonald shooting and the controversy around that. If you'd like to join the conversation, 780-4909. So, Alex, are you suggesting that this was intentional, likely intentional on the part of the officers, that they limited the sound?
Well, I should say whether or not it was intentional, I can't say I wasn't there. Do I know that there are officers who do it intentionally? Absolutely. Does it make me suspicious? Absolutely, it does.
Can I ask you another question or two about the incident itself? What does it say to you in terms of I don't know, protocol or even the police culture that this one officer was the only one shooting, and no one seemed to go to try to stop him. And also, once he was done shooting into the body of Laquan McDonald, no one tended to the body, at least as far as we can tell on the video. No one went over to administer first aid or to check on Laquan. Why do you think that is?
Well, let me. I'll start from one. I want to say I've talked in detail with lots of different officers: white officers, black officers, Hispanic officers, Asian officers, about this, and I haven't found anyone who thinks that Officer Van Dyke was justified in shooting Laquan McDonald while he was on the ground. Mm-hmm. Given what we can see, we almost all, myself included, actually feel that given use of force models and the way laws are written as far as interactions with police, by not dropping the knife, and even though it's just a knife, it's still considered a deadly weapon, Officer Van Dyke probably was justified in using deadly force, but that's not to say he had to. There are other options, especially there were a lot of officers around.
So do you mean he was legally justified, but maybe there were other options that he could have?
Well, there were other options he could have taken. Mm-hmm. And if, one's going to go in and redesign laws and use of force models for departments, maybe that would be different. But the way they generally are, stand, if someone is holding a knife and they're not dropping it, and the person, even if he's trying to move away, but he's continuing to not obey commands, you'd be surprised how quickly someone can strike at you with a knife. With a knife, it's a deadly weapon. It's a deadly force situation. It's ugly. It's horrible. This young man was 17, and now he won't get to live his life.
Well, let me ask you this, Alex, because that,
sure.
So they knew he had a knife. Perhaps they didn't know if he had any other weapons. They may
That's
not
right.
have. So
they also, as was found later, post-mortem toxicology showed he was full of PCP.
Okay.
Which probably explains his erratic behavior.
Yeah.
But
so my question is this, though, because we touched on this last time we spoke, I think, about the Tamir Rice incident. The question is, why are officers not trained to give themselves more distance and cover even from their vehicles when interacting with suspects? I mean, and wouldn't that sort of avert the need to resort to lethal violence?
Well, sure, except that one has to remember that in my department, for example, deadly force is justified against someone who is, say, distant from you or moving away from you if you have a reasonable suspicion that that person might cause great bodily harm or death to someone else, for example, even if you are not in direct harm. Obviously, if you are in immediate fear of receiving great bodily harm or death, you're justified in using deadly force. I actually, in this situation, given the positioning, they want to be close to the guy because he's in the middle of the street. There are cars going by. They haven't had enough time to block off the street. I actually don't think in this situation it makes sense to create distance. My main criticism of the way they approached it is they had enough officers that you could have. There were, I think there were at least 4 officers present before any shots were fired, which means you could have had 3 with their guns drawn, ready to shoot if he goes at somebody. The 4th one could have tried to fire a taser.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to me the best way to approach it right there. The fact that only 1 officer shot, well, he was the one who was just ready to go. The other guys were thinking, hey, let's see what this kid does.
Yeah.
They didn't feel, well, I'm not going to try to say what Jason Van Dyke feels because I can't in any way sympathize or empathize with somebody who's shooting at a body on the ground.
Right.
Once you've already, I can understand. I can understand. I could see myself in that same situation shooting him, but I can't see me shooting at the guy on the ground.
Right.
I can't see me emptying my magazine into a motionless body of a young boy on the ground. That I can't understand at all.
How do you explain that? Because you have in the past mentioned that there is a racist strain in law enforcement.
Sure.
You've observed it. Do you think that had anything to do with it, or is it simply the power trip of, I have this immeasurable authority and I'm going to exercise it because someone has defied me?
to be honest. I mean, I could hypothesize about the fact that, yeah, there are plenty of people going to law enforcement because they're naturally bullies, and now they have a legal justification to bully people as they see it. That's how they choose to do their job. I know plenty of people who choose to escalate situations instead of de-escalating situations because that's how their personality works. I don't really think that they're well suited for it, but for as long as there have been police, there have been people like that with a badge. That being said, I could just as well explain to you why two people with a 2-year-old would go and shoot up a bunch of people in San Bernardino, California. I can't get into the head of somebody who's doing that. I can relate to. I can make some guesses about things. For all I know, Jason Van Dyke is a raging racist and thought here was his excuse to do it. Maybe he had some thought, I'm going to make him look hideous for his family at his funeral or something. I don't know. But to me, any of those motivations are insane.
Right.
So I perhaps just in the heat of the moment, what it was, his justification for continuing to fire is he thought that the guy was still moving. He continued to be in fear for his life, and he didn't feel that the threat was neutralized. Officers are taught to fire until the threat is neutralized. His claim is that he didn't feel the threat was neutralized until after his partner told him he was reloading his weapon, and his partner said, "Hey, stop! God. Let me go over and kick the knife away from him."
Oh my God!
And that's that to me
seems
that's
absurd.
Insane.
Yeah.
Could he say he was temporarily insane? I don't know. We'll see how it develops.
Wow. All right. Well, you're listening to the Soapbox on WMPG. My name is Eric. I'm your host, and my guest this evening is Alex. He's a law enforcement officer out in the Midwest who will remain anonymous, but he's been following and is familiar with some of the goings-on out in Chicago surrounding the Laquan McDonald killing. So, Alex, one of the more troubling aspects of this case in particular, and then I think a lot of people are really upset about over in Chicago, is that this officer, I'm sorry, what was his name?
Jason Van Dyke.
Jason Van Dyke did this, killed Laquan McDonald, unloaded his weapon into him, was going to reload apparently while he was on the ground. And there's video of this, and he continued to serve in the department for over a year. And the only way that we found out about this was an intrepid reporter filed a Freedom of Information request and obtained the video. And then we discovered that the city had been, and stop me if I'm wrong on any of this, but then it was revealed that the city had been paying amounts to hush money to the family to keep the video private.
Well, let me, I don't know that we have evidence that they had continued payments like hush money. I haven't heard that.
Okay. But they did make
the time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, hold on. The timeline is as follows. The incident occurs as following protocol. I assume it's standard protocol with Chicago police. It is in most departments. Any officer who is involved in the shooting is immediately put on administrative duty while the shooting is being investigated. Pretty quickly he was put on essentially indefinite desk duty, and I believe he was actually stripped of his police powers. He wasn't suspended, but he wasn't allowed to actually go out and patrol or anything. Also, the city came to a settlement. Essentially, a wrongful death lawsuit had been brought against the city, the department, by Laquan McDonald's family, and they settled for $5 million. Rather than go to trial, presumably because they felt pretty confident they would lose and probably be cost more money.
Why do you think they felt that they would lose?
Because the video would have to be released as evidence, and it's pretty clear. A very quick aside: a lot of people want to criticize police in any shooting incident, and they say, if you had to shoot the guy, why didn't you try to shoot him in the leg or try to shoot the weapon out of his hand? That's actually a really silly argument. We don't want our police to be trained like military snipers. Police are trained to shoot center of mass until the threat is neutralized. that's the only way to get the number of police we have. Chicago has, I don't know how many. It's got to be over 10,000 officers. I think there's over 30,000 in New York. You're not going to train that number of people to be sharpshooters who can shoot a gun or a knife out of somebody's hand.
Right.
Treat them to shoot center of mass means they're more likely to hit what they're shooting at instead of somebody behind that person if there are innocent bystanders around. That being said, they felt pretty confident that the continued shooting into the body would make the city liable possibly for more than the $5 million. I can only assume that's what's going through their heads. I mean, I haven't talked to any people. But so they settled. Then, yes, a news reporter found some information about it, requested to see the video. Presumably they were suspicious because of the amount of money. That's a pretty high settlement, even for Chicago. And I think that they were suspicious out because of the amount of money that it may have been something odd about it. And when they realized there was video of the incident, they requested to see it. The city stonewalled them, tried to get a judge to delay anything, and finally a judge ruled that they were forced to reveal it. Right after the judge said they were forced to reveal the video, the Cook County State's Attorney announced charges were being drawn against Officer Van Dyke for first-degree murder. Kind of suspicious timing.
Right. So you think that was a PR move?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. But it's certain the accusation being leveled by the protesters in the city, supported by the National Black Lives Matter movement, is that it was a cover-up, that the city knew that this was egregious behavior, and rather than bring charges against the officer initially, they decided to cover it up.
And do you disagree with that assessment?
I think it's a pretty good guess.
Yeah.
We'll see as more evidence comes out. It's really fairly early days in it, even though the shooting happened over a year ago. But I know that Anita Alvarez, the Cook County State's Attorney, has vehemently refused to resign, as has Mayor Emanuel, though he seems to continue to try to give in to things, I guess, hoping that the calls for his resignation stop. He initially said he opposed the Department of Justice probe of Chicago police, and then in less than 24 hours after making that statement, he flip-flopped and said, no, actually, he welcomes it. And now I think I saw a headline today saying that he actually thinks it's a really good idea, and he really, really wants the Department of Justice in there as soon as possible.
Right. Well, and let me ask you this about Mayor Rahm Emanuel. What, to your understanding currently, which may or may not be any greater than any of us, who have access to the newspapers, but to what extent is he implicated in the withholding of this information and the withholding of charges against this officer?
I couldn't say.
Yeah.
I couldn't say. I honestly do not know how closely he would be briefed on incidents as they happen. The now ex-superintendent of the Chicago Police, Gary McCarthy, surely would have seen the video. I know in my department, if we had an incident like that, I'm quite sure that all our top brass would have seen the video. Even ones who didn't have to probably would have wanted to. There's a kind of in most police culture, dark humor is common. It's the nature of the beast, and people are going to probably want to see like, hey, let me see that. Oh, that was pretty bad. I don't know. Seems whenever there's video of something of some incident, everybody wants to see it. I don't know if that says that we're all sadists, or probably even more just we want to see it and think there's probably even more, even though most people would admit it. I think there's an element of empathy. You see it and you imagine what would you do in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Alex. We're running out of time here, but I'm curious. I don't. Well, I guess we spoke after Ferguson. I'm kind of curious how, on the one hand, you are a socialist and your fellow officers know that. You are also a law enforcement officer. What is your take on the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you sympathize with this movement. Do you think that there is, endemic problem in law enforcement in this country that needs to be addressed? Or do you sympathize with the officers and say you're just doing your job?
I mean, to some degree, it's a little of both. I can sympathize with any officer.
And we got 1 minute, Alex. Sorry. Just one more minute. Go ahead.
Oh, sure.
Oh, 3 minutes, actually. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be quick. But I can certainly sympathize with any officer who gets in a situation where he may feel that it's his duty to perform an action which later looks really, really ugly. Frankly, law enforcement, when the public starts seeing the videos, I think that's the main reason all these things are coming out. There's so much more visibility of what police are doing. They see that a lot of what police do is ugly. I have seen incidents which have been decried in public as horrible police brutality that I look at it and I think that's a reasonable use of force, because I've seen similar incidents and I can understand how what might look like abuse of power actually is following the protocol the way officers are trained. That being said, excessive force is a problem nationwide, and it is most routinely meted out to those who have the least ability to make the public aware of the injustice that's happening to them and to fight that. The people who have the least amount of money to hire lawyers, who don't have access to news reporters. You don't see this sort of stuff happening to fat cats on Wall Street. If somebody's being arrested for white collar crime, they're going to be treated with kid gloves because all the police involved know this person can just go and hold a news conference and the press will show up for it. That's not the case with some kid who lives in the slums. I do think that racism is common among cops, more common, say, than in the general public. I don't think it's predominant. But that being said, I think, and this may be mostly the socialist in me, it's much more of a class issue. That's not to say that police are just out to get poor people, but police have more interaction with poor people. And because of the nature of our society, which essentially leaves a lot of the working class and poverty-stricken people of this country feeling like they have no recourse but crime, that police have interactions with people who they can take advantage of. And unfortunately, a lot of officers do. And until we can find a way to change culture, that's going to keep happening. And until we can find a way to change the nature of poverty and the ability of people to come out of poverty in this country, people are still going to turn to crime.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for now, Alex. Thank you, as always, for coming on the show. Alex, law enforcement officer out in the Midwest. Thanks for coming on the Soapbox.
My pleasure, Eric. Happy to talk to you.
And thank you for listening. Thank you to Azad for engineering the show tonight. And we'll have another episode for you here on WMPG next Wednesday. Stick around for Dog's Dinner. I see a sub in there for Pope, but I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. So stick around for that and have a wonderful evening, folks. See you next week.